we've been talking a lot about clean energy in the north, but what Nick has been reminding us is that this is a global issue, and a global issue which actually creates some fantastic opportunities. So that final graph you showed with sort of the clean energy economy growing by about 11% and the rest of the economy growing by about 2.5% is sort of a real message for the opportunities that it creates. And Nick also talked about that the government's legislation for net zero by 2050. The purpose of the rest of this panel is to discuss what the political and business framework we need if we're going to achieve that target. And we've got a really experienced panel. It's all white male again, I'm afraid, but I'm afraid we did have some female representation, but as I mentioned earlier, that's been lost unfortunately to the general election. But our panel now is Matthew Fell, who's the Chief UK Policy Director at the CBI. Richard Tim German, from the Energy Systems Catapult. And thank you very much indeed for stepping in right at the last minute. Richard Crossick, UK Public Affairs Manager for Orsted, and then very finally David Laister, the business editor for the Grimsby Telegraph and the Scunthorpe Telegraph, who's going to be fantastic in giving us a perspective of what all of this means for this area. What I'm going to ask each of them to do, probably actually from their seats, it's for about 5 minutes, just give you their perspective, and then we do have some roving mics. We'll open it up for to get a sort of a conversation with you and with them. And as I say, we'll finish probably about 5 minutes late so that we can do full justice to this session. So, Matthew, over to you.
Philip, thanks very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along. I feel I should follow Nick's lead by displaying local credentials. So Hull is hometown for me, in actual fact. But I declare that with two important caveats. The first is having lived and worked down in London for the best part of 2 decades now, I'm well aware in these parts that your passport gets withdrawn pretty rapidly. And then the second caveat is I've not actually declared that I'm back on home turf. So if any of my family find out, I'm in big trouble. We'll keep stum about that. What I thought I would do is actually just open up with a little bit of a message at the start to say actually business is just completely up for this challenge, and really importantly, I think is absolutely part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem to be solved. And we see that not just, as Nick mentioned, by the huge strides that we've made in terms of low carbon power generation, but also the sort of new technologies that are coming on stream, whether that be the likes of sort of carbon capture and so on, how our buildings and our premises are being transformed by some of the sort of leading companies in the UK, or whether it's some of the new innovations and so on that are coming on stream, whether that be sort of electric vehicles and so on. So in many different parts of the economy, business is really part of the solution. And for me, I think that's fairly self-evident. It's not just because it is fundamentally the right thing to do. Of course, that is true, and it is super important, but also because we just get such significant economic benefits flowing from this. We know that the sort of green economy is growing probably something like 4 times faster than the rest of the economy combined. It's leading to significant job creation, whether that be through retrofitting homes, new technologies such as hydrogen and so on, many opportunities there. And of course, as Nick alluded to, it's a massive opportunity for the UK to compete and win on the world stage. So it's not just that we're benefiting from all of these new technologies and the advancements we're going to make closer to home, but if we can really sort of bottle that know-how and then export that and sell it into other economies around the rest of the world, that is a brilliant success story for the UK. So we know we've had many of those successes already. The charts that we were shown a few moments ago, really quite compelling story, basically, that sort of GDP growth goes terrifically in one direction, emissions are going down at the same time. That puts the UK far ahead of any other G7 nation. So we've got lots of successes. But of course, there is always more to do. The hard work, in a sense, starts now. And our thought is, how do you really then enable business to go further, faster, and do even more? And I think, as I get around the country and talk to firms now, The real message is we are completely up for a net zero target, but we need a plan to get there. And more than anything, we need action. So I thought I'd just share a few thoughts as to what might be in that plan and what we need to do now to really make further progress. Because it's clear, I think, that we're actually trying to go for something here that nobody has really achieved on this scale previously. So, what might that look like? First thought would be, let's absolutely build on what works and double down on doing it. We know, actually, that this is an ambitious target, and we're not going to get there unless every bit of government, business, the rest of society is all hooked up to the same agenda. So, really important that we get that government bit hooked up and working together. Just to take one example of that, if any of the businesses in the room today decide to improve the energy efficiency of their premises, investing, say, in solar panels, new energy efficiency measures and so on, your business rates bill is going to go up. And that seems a bit counterintuitive and absurd. So we need to be making sure we're just baking in the right incentives and everyone is pulling in the same direction, every bit aligned. So build on what works. Is it about replicating the success of offshore wind with onshore wind? Is it about scaling up that use of new technologies that are already proving themselves, carbon capture, hydrogen, and so on? Is it about getting new finance models in place so we can accelerate nuclear replacement programs and so on? We need everything hooked up and turning in the same direction. Next thought from me would be really around turning our attention to transport and heat, because this is where the going really gets tougher. We know that transport still generates something like about a quarter of all UK emissions, heating 30%, ballpark there. So we need to get these really important parts of the economy turning green and making progress on that. We've had a good start, but we need to do much, much more. And then the third thought for me would be about an honest conversation. And here I think we know we've got a terrific story to tell already in terms of the progress we've made in terms of our emissions generated closer to home. But we need to start telling the whole story. It's no good being as green as we possibly can be here in the UK if all we are doing is importing products and so on from overseas that are causing pollution elsewhere. That is just outsourcing a problem in a sense. So our thought there is we should time to start involving both the sort of production and the consumption numbers in the overall figures that report, so we can make sure we're making genuine progress on a global stage as well. So those are the actions that we think we should be taking. Let me finish with two quick risks that we need to head off. The first of those is around the politics, particularly timely right now, given that we're in a general election period. All of the progress we have made to date, I feel, has been largely because we have had strong political consensus around this issue, the need to grip it and to make real progress on it. And that has enabled a lot of the progress to date. So it's really important that we hang on to that political consensus and don't start chipping away at it, whether that be through chopping and changing of different policies in the short term and them getting buffeted around by politics, making moves to sort of pull the rug from under the significant investments that business has made to date. So we need to hold on and lock in that political consensus. And then the final thought from me in terms of a risk and to close is actually it's really important that we bring people with us on this agenda. It's super important we don't alienate the very people we're really trying to inspire to act and to bring with us on this journey. And that would be easily done. For example, we know these new measures are going to be costly. We need to get the cost down and to make sure we introduce it in a way that isn't going to load people who can least afford it with further costs, and particularly those people who work in the industries that we know are going to be changed and the technologies are going to be different in the future, that we get the retraining and the reskilling right so that those people can continue to thrive in those industries. Failure to do either of these things would lead to a real disconnect through society at the time when we need everyone hooked up to the same agenda. So those would be my thoughts, Philip.
Okay.
Happy to get going in the discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. Well, look, let's move straight on to Tim German, Government and Regulatory Relationships Manager at the Energy Systems Catapult, responsible for sort of perhaps developing some of or encouraging the development of some of that technology that Matthew was alluding to.
Exactly. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I apologise, I'm not Amy. That's pretty obvious, I think. And because I'm here, the panel's been disrupted, as Philip said, so it's now a manel, so that's another apology. And the third apology before I start is that I didn't get home to get my best suit and my best shoes, so I've got my nice red boots on. Okay, so I'm responsible, as Philip said, for government and regulator relationships at the Energy Systems Catapult. Very important work for ours. Just to let you know, Catapult is one of 9 catapults. One of the others, Offshore Renewals Catapult, is exhibiting downstairs, I've noticed. Obviously got a great lot of work around this area. And but the Energy Systems Catapult is a slightly different catapult in that the hint is in the title. We deal with energy systems, so we're sort of technology agnostic, but it's all about whole energy systems. So we cover how you have to, in the future energy system, have to combine where you look at energy in a different way from the way it's been siloed in the past. So it's so obviously it's electricity, it's heat, and it's transport. So those are the 3 areas of where we say are key vectors which have to now be much closer linked into the future energy system, but also governed by how the energy system itself gets to the consumer. So the consumer themselves are very important. We particularly are interested in how you decarbonise heat. We've done a lot of work on that, and that's where we've been commissioned by the government to do a lot of work as well. And then how that's all supported by policy and regulation, and that, I suppose, is where the importance of my role comes in. For the Energy Systems Catapult, there are various things which are cornerstones, 2 of which are that the energy system for the future will have to be digitalised. There's the role of digital and data is hugely important going forward, and that it's decentralised, because that's where we feel there's going to be most growth by doing it that way, clean growth in the country. And indeed, the Clean Growth Strategy talks a lot about the need for taking it down to local level. So we're concentrating on that, and what I'm going to talk about for the next 4 minutes now is about work we've been doing with government as part of money that's come from government, because we are core-funded by government, by the way, but although we're independent. And this is around the work that we've been doing on what we call local area energy planning. We've trialled this programme in various parts of the UK. We originally were discussing it also with Hull City Council as well. We believe that local energy planning is the foundation on which everything is to grow for the future. It's been recognised in the recent report, the consultation document that's gone out, which is guidance actually to district network operators to say local energy planning is something that's going to be important for their business planning going forward as well. So we believe that local energy planning supports innovation at local level. It supports jobs and skills. As I said, it supports the network's business planning for the future, and also helping with price controls as well. The Committee on Climate Change believes that local energy planning, or certainly taking this down to local level with the role of local authorities, is very important going forward. So there are various things that we're doing on that. As I say, we've trialled this across the country. And we are now in a lot of discussions ourselves with government and with Ofgem and Scottish Government and Welsh Government about this as well. The reasons why local energy planning is so important is because every local area is different. The people are different, the geography is different, and their priorities are different, and their building stock is different. And if you're going to address this hugely crucial issue of decarbonising heat, then particularly in domestic sector, then it's going to have to be driven from local level to be able to make that happen, alongside the policy and the regulation that's going to have to make it happen. So the key principles for us are that it's going to have to be very data-driven. It needs to be linked into spatial planning going forward. It's a very collaborative methodology. There are key partners you have to make this happen. So we believe that the local authorities are absolutely crucial at the centre of this, along with the district network operators and the gas distribution network operators, because they hold a lot of keys into the local community, particularly with the network operators. They hold a lot of data, and we believe this takes you right down to individual housing data as well. So that's really important. So that's one of the reasons why local authorities and others are key factors in taking this further forward. So if you consider that local energy planning is the foundation on which other things can grow, it is the essential decision-making tool, because Now, as we're hearing, and I'm sure you've heard over the last 2 days, local authorities, including Hull here, are taking the 2050 target down to 2030. We've even heard of some trying to compete and take it down to 2028. And boy, is that difficult. I mean, we're just one of those organisations that local authorities phone up every day and say, we've set this target, we don't know how to deliver it. So it is a major challenge. So the key principles for us of local energy planning are that it needs to be multi-vector, as I've explained. You need to have key stakeholders involved. I've mentioned the key ones, local authorities, district network operators, gas distribution network operators, but there can be a wide range of other key stakeholders engaged in that process as well. But we also believe if you're doing local area energy planning, it should be technology agnostic. So don't start with, we're going to do this, so prove it's right, because the whole point is to say, actually, if you look at this, maybe this isn't the right decision. If you want to do it in the most cost-effective way, it could be this way of doing it. And if you want to support local jobs and skills, it's this way of doing it. So you have to take all those things into factor to do it. All local energy plans need to address the challenge of heat, because it's crucial. And also bring into it now the challenge of transport, which we talked about. So we're in discussions with others now about how you take local energy planning and local transport planning and combine them into a complete package, which seems very sensible when you're talking about addressing decarbonisation and climate change. And the benefits of them that they help to target investment, they help local authorities and local businesses, local enterprise partnerships, etc., to be able to target the investment going forward in appropriate ways. It helps to improve the local capability. One of the major challenges for this, which we're in discussions with government about at the moment, and others, I have to say at this moment, is that local authorities are very underfunded to do this. I mean, they've lost a lot of local authorities. There are fantastic resources here in Hull. I know the energy manager here, I can't see him at the moment, but I saw him earlier on. There are some fantastic experts across the country, but on the majority, with all the 400 or whatever it is local authorities, they have lost that skills base. So that needs to be reinvested into local authorities. And it's certainly local energy planning supports jobs. It needs to be linked, as I said, to spatial planning going forward. That's crucial. And that it's also part of this discussion going forward with Rio 2 on network regulation going forward. So that may be my 4 minutes.
I think it probably is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Tim. That was excellent. Thank you. And I'm going to move on now to Richard Crossick. Nick, in his remarks, talked about how much of a lead the UK has got in wind energy. Yep. Richard works for Ørsted, formerly Dong Energy, which is the global leader in wind energy. So a fantastic introduction to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, and when you look at our UK portfolio, by 2022, we think we'll be generating about 6-7% of the UK's energy just from our wind farms. But at an industry level, you're looking at a third of all electricity generated in the UK coming from offshore wind. And that sets the context for what I'm going to talk about now, which is a little bit about the skills opportunity. We had an amazing session on skills actually earlier. We went into a lot of detail for an hour. But I'll just touch a little bit now on what that means for the offshore wind industry. There's about 11,000 people working directly, so that's directly for the operators or for the tier one suppliers. By 2030, that's 27,000 people, and tens of thousands more in the supply chain across the UK. And that particularly often means a lot for the coastal communities and the areas that these clusters of offshore wind are focused in. So we know it very well in the Humber, but there's other clusters around the UK as well. And most of these jobs are in technical and engineering roles. That's where most of the opportunities are. And so we're looking a little bit now, what are we doing to get people into this industry? And I mean, the first area is getting young people into the industry as their first jobs. Looking at the apprenticeship program, we've set up our apprenticeship program now. It's in its third year of running. If you look at other companies, certainly companies in the Humber, but all around the UK, they've also got their equivalent apprenticeship program. So Siemens Gamesa is the obvious one, this side of the Humber here. But you're seeing that everywhere. And you're seeing huge competition for places in those programs. I know at the moment we're the kind of sexy, shiny new thing, and that helps. But it's not just the offshore wind developers themselves where the opportunities are. It's in all the different supply chain companies everywhere. We're also reaching out to some of the technical colleges. We're working with their programs. We're helping implement new programs in them. We're doing outreach sessions with them and other further education colleges around the country as well. So we have a community benefit fund that's over £1 million a year, and a section of that will always be ring-fenced for skills funding, whether that's bursaries for individuals or, again, working with the colleges themselves to develop new programs. But the second piece of that is actually getting more experienced people into the industry. So an obvious source for us, if you look at our workforce, ex-military personnel, a huge number of people with the right skills who've come through the military who are now working in this industry. We're doing a lot of outreach with the military, and I know, again, there's other, if you look at fellow supply chain companies and other developers, they're doing something very, very similar as well. And similarly, you'll look at people coming from other industries. You've got a lot of power sector workers in our industry, maybe in areas either they move themselves, maybe their power station is one of the ones which are the coal power stations which are closing down, and that's another important kind of, it's a source of labour for us, it's a source of our employees, but it's another set of opportunities for people, which is really, really important because this transition is going to be difficult. There's going to be companies, there's going to be sectors which are not going to be as big as they used to be, and there's other new sectors, and Nick talked about the growing opportunities in the economy as well. But that does mean change, and it does mean people moving and changing and reskilling. So one of the areas, for example, that's come out of the sector deal, which you might have heard a lot about over the last 2 days, is something called an offshore passport. So that's going to be us working with the oil and gas industry, working with other sectors, the power sector, to try and kind of create mutual recognition of qualifications. So individuals can move across, back and forth between sectors, hopefully, far more easily than they can at the moment. It's crazy that you've got people coming in who've been working in the offshore environment in oil and gas or working in, say, with rotating equipment in the power sector and having to completely retrain with us. It doesn't make sense. And finally, we heard a lot today about the kind of backdrop of this. This is the backdrop of a skill shortage in the UK for technical and engineering skills. It's probably something that we've not yet experienced ourselves as a company, but we're aware it's out there. We're aware when we talk to our supply chain, we talk to other companies that they're feeling that. So I think the next stage that we do, and we heard so much about other companies doing this as well as ourselves, we work with companies such as Teach First to get more teachers into schools, talking about the opportunities for STEM careers. We'll go in ourselves. We're hoping to create more employees to go in and do more of that as well. And we'll support, organisations like Women in Manufacturing and Engineering. It is insane that almost 50% of our population, i.e. the female part of our population, is not part of the skills pool that we're dipping into. It's a huge lack of opportunity for us, and it's going to damage our industry and most of industry in the UK if we can't fix that problem. But I mean, just to finish, I think it really is to emphasise this incredible, huge opportunity and excitement around this industry and offshore wind, and we're going to see it replicated in other industries and other new industries that aren't even there yet. We talked about the hydrogen industry or the storage industry, probably industries we haven't even thought of, or other sections within existing industry, whether it's, we saw Phillip 66 earlier and other companies who are creating whole new different ways of working as they transition through this energy, this change we're going to see over the next 20, 30 years. And it is a huge, huge opportunity for young and experienced people in this country now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And David, I mean, a sort of beautiful segue from Richard onto you as well. I mean, wind energy has created huge opportunities in this region, but it's also presumably created some challenges for more carbon-intensive industries. I wonder if you could give us the perspective from the sort of the Humber area, from your perspective as the business editor for the local press.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we're talking a lot about 2050, 2040, 2028 possibly as this target. And for me, it's important to sort of look back 13 years rather than forward 31 at the moment, because 13 years ago, if you think 2006, Grimsby was a very different place to what it is now. It lost a fishing industry. It had the legacy of the seafood industry. It had a functioning port that was slightly underutilised. And then a Humber chemical cluster, and there was a real need, for something to give it an identity back. And along came offshore wind. I remember speaking to one of the senior figures at the Crown Estate, and he described it as Grimsby as being sort of the next door neighbour to sort of the best real estate in the world for offshore wind. And we realised as a in my role certainly as sort of looking after the business interests for the local newspaper, that this was going to be a big opportunity and that we should sort of back it, significantly. And we channeled a lot of energy ourselves into really championing what was happening. And there's a group, you see that on the slide there, Grimsby Renewables Partnership. It was, that came to being because, of events like this where there was an opportunity to showcase what Grimsby did and, internationally and try and pull in investment. It's very, very early days. And, we started off in Grimsby with basically 2 men and a boat. Linen in a Dowsing offshore wind farm, the first one off the Humber. Small scale, but it was there and it came in. And then suddenly there was this realization that we were so close to everything that was happening that we could make more of it. And the cluster now that we see, sort of 13 years on, we've ramped up from from 0 to 2.5 gigawatts at the moment. And there's a clear pathway to 10 gigawatts. And that's created, a huge amount of jobs. The supply chain, it's played a key role, if not the initial role really, in that sort of energy estuary rebranding that we've seen across the Humber. Because you've got to remember that all this was happening kind of 5 or 6 years before spades were in the ground on the blade factory and everything in Hull. This was real sort of pioneering stuff for the Humber. And now we're at a place where you feel there is a unique, cluster field to what Grimsby offers. And we've had, we heard on Tuesday that the offshore renewable energy Catapult is bringing a centre of excellence for O&M because they recognise that Grimsby not only has the biggest cluster as the UK leads the world, Grimsby has the biggest cluster in the UK, but that sort of growth space is still there to really, to ramp up again. And the opportunities for the technology, the data, the digitalisation that's been mentioned on this panel already exists in Grimsby because that's where it's happening. People want to be next door to Ørsted, to Energy, to E.ON and others who are operating in the sphere. They want to be part of that. That's where they're going to tap into the knowledge that's already been built up, and that's where that's where it's going to succeed. The flip side, you mentioned obviously that as you look down the Humber bank, you have a lot of old sort of traditional industry there that is energy intensive. It's carbon intensive. We've got some of the worst emissions, I think, of the UK in this area, as well as the biggest opportunity in renewables. But it presents a great opportunity, doesn't it? Because if you want to make a mark, if you want to change something, where are you going to do it? Are you going to do it where you can make the biggest difference? And I think the Humber has got a great opportunity to see that. And we are seeing carbon capture, use and storage coming through. We are seeing the hydrogen opportunity being developed. We've mentioned before, I think Phillip 66 have been mentioned. Others are doing very similar things where they're starting to embrace green opportunities that can be done. Whether it's through waste oils or producing elements that are needed for the green economy, battery technology, storage. It's happening. And because you've got that activity, that critical mass is building, you're then attracting people in who don't need to be in the area, but they see a benefit to be there. From sort of micro generation businesses looking to expand and develop, they want to be part of it because they recognise there's a wider badge. There's opportunities like this conference, like other conferences, where the spotlight's going to be on this area because it's doing something big and changing, and they can be part of it too. And it's been great to have a front row seat for this last 13, 14 years of how it's developed. And we've literally gone from, this 2 men in a boat, very small scale boats. I remember we had some slides and I had the pictures on them, but there was a ramp basically down from the old fish market because trawlers are way high and the crew transfer vessels are, sort of tiny things that sat on the sort of water like a catamaran, and they put in this new sort of tiny pontoon, and it was a great celebration because it actually allowed them to get people onto the crew transfer vessels to use the fish docks to get out to Linen in a Dow's in the wind farm. And then we saw the development of the first O&M hub, and that was amazing. And then we saw a second one, and we saw a bigger pontoon, and we saw more vessels coming. And then it moved on to the impressions and everything for what became the East Coast hub that also developed 350 to 400 people working from Grimsby in this new sexy industry that that people want to. And then it is aspirations are rising. And you can see that children, teenage. I've got children in. That they have an awareness that this is here. And you can go on to Cleethorpes Seafront, and I would recommend everyone to go on Cleethorpes Seafront. You can go on Cleethorpes Seafront, and you can see the wind farms operating. And at night the lights are blinking out there, and it's something that you can give people a bit of passion and pride that's probably been missing since that sort of fishing industry was taken away. And it's great to see, and long may it continue. And I can only see that with the economies of scale, the way that it's clustering. We saw the round foregrass, I think, yesterday in Emma Torson's presentation. It's here. It's going to be around here, and may the Grimsby, the Humber, and the North prosper on the back of it.
Absolutely.
I think there's a slight area where we've had to manage expectation about the number of jobs that are going to be created and things like that. And 27,000 by 2030 is a fantastic figure. I think there was early days of my reporting of it. It was basically one job per turbine. That was kind of the feel for it. And suddenly the turbines went from being 3 megawatt to 9 megawatts. Is that 3 people, or is that still one person? So I think there's been a careful sort of management of that expectation. But it's growing, it's huge, and it's here, and long way to continue.
Fantastic, and a brilliant story of kind of how sort of the clean growth, clean energy industry is helping to sort of really revitalise a local economy in the north. So thank you very much indeed. Right. Well, hopefully we've got some roving mics around the room. Question, please.
Brendan Conlon, sit on the Humber LEP, Managing Director of Online Design. Thank you for the plug for the South Bank, David. And thank you for Ørsted and offshore wind for very good inroads into what we've been for clean growth. My question is actually more to Matthew and to Tim about local power. Because if you look at Britain and you go back historically, Britain was built on a spine of an infrastructure from the centre going out. We're now building offshore wind and nuclear power plants with a view of an infrastructure coming in, but we don't appear to be doing anything with the national infrastructure other than bandaging it and plastering it with store sites all up and down the country that are uneconomical, not good for the carbon economy, and not cheap for the consumer.
Who'd like to pick on going on?
I'll have a first crack at that. I think, Brent, terrific observation, and that sounds absolutely on the money to me. I mean, for me, I think that in a sense is all sort of wrapped up with this idea of how do we get sort of decentralisation and devolution really working properly. And as I get around the country, you can see it really has taken hold and is working well in parts of the country, and it's working less well in others. And I think we just need to make sure that we absolutely sort of capture the best of the best and give everyone the best shot at doing this. And I think it applies in spades in this sector and in this industry, but there are many, many benefits of it before. So I think cracking observation, I think that is the way to do it. I think that from the CBI's point of view, it's another example of actually where too much sort of politicking can get in the way of real progress. We need to find sort of ways and mechanisms of taking that short-term politics out of things and putting in place a proper framework that just gets back to a clear, evidence-based, here's what's working, here's what makes sense, and that we don't keep chopping and changing every now and then. So that's kind of be my thoughts on where I'd go, but absolutely bang on.
Okay. Other members?
I'm in agreement with Matthew, and that's a very good point. And you're right about the historical context, absolutely. And of course, that's what has to change. The big challenge is, of course, is how you match the local to the national infrastructure, which is, I think, the basis of your question. And that's one of the reasons why we feel that there has to be an overview guidance on new energy governance on how that's going to happen. So there are lots of discussions at the moment happening about lots of different views, I have to say, about how that can happen. But what our view is that you have local energy governance through the stuff I was talking about, but there has to be over that some governance to say this is how this fits in with the national infrastructure. So, for instance, if you just have lots of hexagons, if you imagine that, and imagine a local energy plan to be a hexagon, you can't have a square next to it. It's not going to make the complete picture for the UK. So that's why we believe that there has to be this conjunction between the two, and it means a completely new look at energy governance for the UK.
Okay, thank you. Other colleague right up at the top.
I'm a utility scale solar developer. Following on from the comments about the grid access and everything, there are plenty of projects that will generate green energy. The problem is the infrastructure is not fit for purpose, for want of a better expression. When I started 10 years ago, we were connecting into 11 kV lines, and then we worked from there. We're now looking at connections at 132s, which brings their own set of problems. Like the connection costs are £4 or £5 million, plus a £10 million substation, and to get that return, you have to go for quite a sizable 100 to 200 megawatt site. There are plenty of those sites around. The issue is, up to 49.9 megawatts, it's a local determination. So the cost of that is about £120,000, under £30,000 planning application, and you can do start to finish and do it in a year. As soon as you go over 50 megawatts, which you need to hit the returns needed for the connection, you're looking at a 4 or 5 year planning process, because it's a national importance, so it's through the planning inspectorate, and you're looking at £4 or £5 million worth of planning application fees, plus the connections, etc. So it's disproportionate. So to get a viable green energy power station, which there's only 2 going through at the moment, the money doesn't add up, and it's as though everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing anything about it, and that is stopping. So we're getting to the stage where solar will plateau because there are no connections on the grid. I mean, there's loads of connections in the centre of Sheffield, but you can't put anything on it, and that's the problem. So until there is that joined up thinking from top to bottom, that's what's needed.
Okay, that sounds like regulations getting in the way. Well, let's start with Richard. I mean, does it feel like regulations are getting in the way for you, or?
I mean, I think it's very different for the smaller scale renewables, and I appreciate 200, 300 megawatts is not small scale compared to the wind farms which are going through the national infrastructure process. We're building now at utility scale. But having said that, actually we are experiencing a similar network problem. We're asking for network connections for new wind farms we want to develop, and we're getting responses from National Grid. Oh, absolutely. By 2031, we'll get you a space. And somehow I think the next step for offshore wind, as well as other kind of renewables, is going to have to be a kind of change for the way the National Grid runs this system. That's probably going to need some support from Ofgem and from BEIS itself to guide it how to do this. It's doing what it's being told to at the moment. But for the level of change you're looking at and the speed of change over the next 10 years, yes, something's going to have to change in the way that's done. Okay. Definitely.
And Tim, this is sort of at the heart of your work on energy systems as well, isn't it?
Yes, of course. And I suppose my last answer, sort of half of the answer you were looking for that. We said it's got to be top down, but it also has to be bottom up. That's really, really important. I'm not the expert in that area, because the area I've worked most of my time in is the sort of household stuff I was talking about around heat and stuff, rather than the big scale generation. But it's really important. That's why you have to have this new type of energy governance I was referring to, and I think that's reflecting what you're saying. Of course, the RIIO2 consultation is going to be really important too.
David, as you go around the South Humber area, are you getting feedback from perhaps sort of businesses that would like to connect to the grid, but where actually they're being constrained?
I have heard of it as being a slight frustration for some. It is, obviously the people want to bring green energy projects forward. We've seen, we've obviously got the offshore wind. We've got, but there's a lot of waste to energy. And that's a big sort of growth area as well. And it's getting those connections. What we seem to be seeing at the moment is clustering around existing or legacy connections. So you have, I think Hornsey comes on, doesn't it? 1 and 2 come on at what was a huge, gas-fired power station that's been decommissioned. You're seeing others brought forward in other areas, and there's a clustering around existing power scenarios, which is great when you've got that network and capacity. But I think, if you wanted to start afresh in a greenfield build, it is difficult, and I think they have been, there is that barrier to growth there. But then it's probably, it plays in the Humber's advantage that you've got this legacy energy infrastructure as, which can be adapted for the new needs.
Okay, well look, we're almost up to time, but given that we shoehorned Nick Bridge into the early session, I said we'd just run on a few extra minutes. I'm going to take 2 more quick questions, if there are any, from the audience. Then I'm going to give each of our panel members just a minute or so just to sum up. I've got a couple of other questions that people want to sort of raise. Well, look, let's invite our panel members just to sort of any further remarks they want to make, and sort of Matthew, let's start with you.
David, thanks in a sense for that last question, and also a sort of mini case study in a sense, which really I think for me just goes back to the opening remarks that I was making about just we really need to get to a place where every bit of sort of thinking, government policy, rules of the game, and so on are all hooked up and pointing in the same direction. And what you've just illustrated is that there are too many of these frustrations where the intent is there, and there are roadblocks in the way that we need to sort of smash down. So thank you for the example. We'll definitely take that away. And then a second thought for me would be, as well as that point you've illustrated, just the importance of knowing where we stand and this importance of a plan, because for some of the things that you just illustrated, we know that is not always a short-term play. You need to know where you stand for the medium and the long term as well, so the payback is there to get the investment going. So for all of those reasons, I'd say clear plan, get it all hooked up the same direction, and then let's have some certainty in it, and that should help to alleviate some of the problems that you and others have highlighted.
Okay, brilliant. Tim?
I'm going to refer to Dave's question again as well. I mean, one of the closest I got to that was when I was running the energy programmes in Cornwall, and we had the solar gold rush at the time when the feed-in tariff, and we had developers coming from all around the world wanting to put solar parks right across Cornwall. That was a major challenge for our electricity network, because there was just not the capability to deal with it. So policy has to join up in the same way that Matthew's saying. 2 things I would say. One is, please don't forget about consumers. I haven't heard that really being mentioned much, and I'm sure it might have been in the rest of the 2 days here, but because they are so important. Understanding consumers and engaging consumers when we come to dealing with decarbonising the stuff that they got in their homes is a huge challenge, and we do need to address that. And just make sure that when you're talking about all this big stuff, you also remember the smaller stuff as well, the stuff that's actually happening. Heat is the biggest challenge alongside transport to decarbonise the UK.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
Thank you. I'm probably actually on a similar vein of, what next for offshore wind, what are the blockers? And one of the things we've got is actually a very nice problem to have, which is the cost has come down so much, it's so successful, and we're looking to push out so much in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to be that old familiar theme that you said, it's this cross-governmental support we need. If we want to build out in the North Sea and on the West Coast as well to this extent, then we're going to need to find a way that kind of marine planning that DEFRA's working on is done in a way that actually doesn't block offshore wind accidentally. We're going to need help from the MOD on radar. All these departments are going to need to start operating together. And to be fair, we've seen it up until now. We are seeing like a lot of intent, but we are going to need this to last for another 5, 10 years of this kind of level of cooperation, because otherwise we're going to accidentally block a big success story.
Brilliant. And then finally to our host.
I think just a word of caution really for how we develop carbon capture and storage and elements like that for the traditional industry there. There are still so many jobs. It's been a driver of the economy for so long. We just be careful where we put the carrot and where the stick is, because there is a massive competitive pressures on steel manufacturing, on oil refining. We saw, if I dare mention the Brexit word, that if we'd gone out with a hard deal, the oil refining industry would have been hit with almost 5% levy against export to import. And it's a very, very fine balancing line where we need to encourage, getting plants hooked up onto this system. We've got a green jet fuel refinery being developed on the South Humber bank. That's going to be ready to plug in, but we need to make sure that transition is as finely balanced as possible, because anything that loads more costs is going to make it less competitive. And what you don't want to do is become net zero because you've taken infrastructure and industry away. So it's just a very fine line.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely marvellous. Fantastic panel. Thank you for your contribution. Let's thank the panel and also Nick Bridge from the FCA.